He walked into the room, holding her hand like he used to hold mine. I stood there, hidden behind the thin curtain in the corner of the room, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they would hear it. They laughed, they kissed, and then he betrayed me right in front of my eyes, not knowing I was just a few feet away, watching everything. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I waited. Because revenge is best served cold. It started 2 months before our anniversary, on a rainy Tuesday that smelled like old regret. James, my husband of 8 years, had become a stranger in our home. The small things began to unravel first. A sudden change in his cologne, new clothes he never mentioned buying, late meetings that bled into the night, and the way he no longer said, "I love you," without being asked. I didn't want to be the paranoid wife, but deep down I knew something had shifted. I tried to ignore it. I cooked his favorite meals, laughed at his tired jokes, and wrapped myself around him in bed like we used to, pretending the distance wasn't growing wider with every forced smile. Then one day, while folding his laundry, I found a receipt for a hotel 2 blocks from his office. 1 room, 2 glasses of wine, a strawberry dessert he never ordered when we were together. My hands trembled. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he had a meeting there. Maybe he took a client out. Maybe I was imagining it all. But the seed of doubt had already taken root. I followed the trail. Subtle phone notifications, new passwords, lies told with too much confidence. The truth was heavy in my chest, pressing down with every beat. I decided not to confront him. Not yet. Instead, I planned. I needed to be sure, to see it with my own eyes. One night, I followed him. He said he had a business dinner. I said nothing. I watched him from across the street as he greeted her outside the hotel. She was younger, smiling like I used to. He touched her face. She leaned in. They entered the building, and I followed them. My stomach twisted with each step. I walked into the hotel lobby, pretending to be looking for someone, just in case someone questioned me. I knew he had registered under a different name. I had already found it in the email confirmation he forgot to delete. It was Jameson Reed, a cheap alias, but enough to get him a keycard. I stood near the elevator, watching it ascend, and memorized the floor number. The desk clerk didn't even glance at me. My palms were sweaty, my breath short. I told myself to walk away, to turn around and leave. But I didn't. I couldn't. I took the stairs, each step echoing the doubts that had lived in my head for months. When I reached the hallway, my heart nearly gave out. Room 312. The door closed behind them. The light under the door flickered, and so I waited. The hallway smelled of cheap perfume and something bitter I couldn't name. I crept behind them, staying far enough not to be seen, but close enough to hear their laughter echo off the walls. Room 312. The door clicked shut behind them. I waited. My heart beat like a war drum in my chest, but my hands were steady. I had brought a master key, A copy I paid a lot of money for through someone who never asked questions. I slipped into the housekeeping closet across the hall and waited. 20 minutes, 30. The corridor remained silent. The soft hum of the elevator rising and falling was the only company I had. My legs began to ache, but I stayed crouched in the shadows. When I was sure the hallway was clear, I moved. My footsteps were silent, my breath slow and measured. I used the key. The door opened with a soft click. The room was dimly lit, warm with the scent of wine and betrayal. I slipped inside and stood behind the curtain. They didn't hear me. The television murmured low. Clothes scattered the floor. The bed creaked beneath them. I didn't look at them at first. I couldn't. But when I did, it wasn't rage that filled me. It was silence. A cold, measured silence that stripped away the 8 years we shared. He whispered things to her he never said to me. He touched her like he had rediscovered passion. I didn't cry. My breath stayed steady. I stood there for what felt like hours, watching my marriage dissolve into moans and half-lit shadows. My thoughts wandered to the day we met, to the first time he told me he loved me, to our wedding vows, to the nights we stayed up dreaming about our future. All of it felt distant now, like echoes of someone else's life. They fell asleep eventually, tangled in each other's arms, their bodies entwined like vines in a dying garden. I slipped out. My feet barely touched the floor. I left the room and walked down the hallway with the calm I didn't recognize. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed in another room, alone, thinking. I didn't want to scream or break things. I wanted to make sure he felt what I felt, but in a way he'd never forget. I wrote everything down, every word he said, every kiss I watched, every betrayal. I turned my pain into a story, and my story into a plan. I wasn't going to let him leave me broken. I was going to make him remember.
Over the next 2 weeks, I lived 2 lives. One, as the quiet, supportive wife he believed was oblivious, and the other, as the architect of his downfall. I smiled during dinner, kissed him goodbye in the morning, and whispered, "I love you," into his lies. But behind every smile, I was building my exit. I hired a lawyer. I gathered evidence, bank statements, messages, security footage from the hotel. I even recorded audio from their room that night using a hidden device I planted the day before. I met with my attorney in secret, prepared the divorce papers, and moved money into a separate account. I created a timeline, each detail backed with proof, each date marked in red. I bought a burner phone and sent anonymous messages to the woman he was seeing. Not threats, just truths, enough to make her uncomfortable. Enough to show her he wasn't the man she thought he was. She started pulling away, canceling meetings, leaving him confused, and I watched him unravel. He drank more, snapped at small things, began staying home more, paranoid and irritable. When everything was ready, I waited for our anniversary. He planned a dinner, booked the same restaurant we went to the night he proposed. He even wore the same suit. I wore red, the same shade I wore the night I told him yes. He toasted to forever. I smiled, and then I handed him a gift-wrapped box. Inside was a USB drive, the hotel receipt, and a note that said, "I was there." His hands trembled, his face drained of color. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The waitress arrived to take our order, but I stood up, kissed him on the cheek, and whispered, "Bon appetit." Then I walked out. I left him with the silence he had gifted me for months. I left him with the weight of knowing I had seen it all. I didn't look back. That night, I checked into a new apartment, a new city, a new beginning. He called dozens of times, left voicemails soaked in regret. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He would never forget what he did, and he would never know the exact moment I stopped loving him. Because some betrayals are not punished with screams. Some are punished with perfect, echoing silence.